Guys, welcome to another edition of JDV on Air. It's my privilege today to have a chat to an old mate of mine, Patrick Cruywagen. A lot of you will remember him as the Bush editor of a legendary magazine here in South Africa called SA 4x4 magazine. But he was also the editor of the Land Rover Monthly magazine in the UK for many years. And of course is very well known worldwide as a photojournalist. Currently, Patrick is the content and marketing head for Frontrunner in Europe. And before we start with some questions from my mate, I wanted to give you guys some background. We met round about 2005 in Cape Town when he was editor of SA 4x4 magazine. We started doing some epic 4x4 and overlanding competitions together. Patrick, I think we did the Eco Challenge in the Kalahari. We did the Fort Ranger Challenge in Limpopo, the Spirit of Africa with Sarah van der Merwe. And where I really learned to get to know the man Patrick was a months-long expedition from Johannesburg through to Tanzania, the Serengeti, Ngorongoro crater, through crossing Lake Victoria into Rwanda, chasing some silverback gorillas, and ending at the source of the Nile at a little village called Jinja in Uganda, and all of that in an unmodified Pajero, which was something I think I will take to my grave still as an absolutely unforgettable experience. So, Patrick, without further ado, you actually started your career in the military. You were 7 years in the military, I think, in Saldanha. And then you made a very deliberate shift to become a photojournalist. Many business guys, of course, pivot their businesses. I mean, what did that transition teach you in terms of going from the military, in terms of a skill set where discipline is such a requirement, to something like photojournalism, where observing and writing the story is a totally different skill set requirement?
Obviously, there's not much writing done when you're in the military. There's lots of running and soldiering, and so early 90s was a exciting time in the history of South Africa. Madiba came out of jail, and it was compulsory back then for people with my skin color to go to the military. You had no choice. I always wanted to go to university, and even while I was at school, I used to love creative writing, and I always told my English teacher, Mrs. Verstad, I was going to be a journalist one day. So it wasn't as if it's just I woke up one morning deciding, okay, now I'm going to be a photojournalist. So it was a very deliberate career change. And also at the time I was messing around in the UK. I was playing cricket, and my partner, her dad, said, no, come on, you're not going to make money out of being a cricketer. You need a proper career. This was after I'd left the military. So I already had one degree, but what can you do with a military strategy degree? You can only be a soldier or make war or work for the United Nations. So it was time to answer that calling of being a photojournalist. So at the age of 27, I went back to university and I studied photojournalism. And it's interesting, there was a man at this university called Montgomery Cooper, who's sadly no longer with us. He died from malaria, from cerebral malaria. But Monty and I used to sit in his office, and because I was an older student, we would drink beer and we would get out a map of Africa and we'd make these grand plans. And one of these plans was sailing across Lake Malawi and putting a car on a boat. There's an old steamship that sails up and down that lake. And we said we were going to do that. And sadly, Monty passed away. But I always had this idea in the back of my head that I wanted to travel Africa and I wanted to go on adventures. And so I was very fortunate once I'd finished studying, I saw an advert. It was literally Monday morning, careers, Cape Times. Do you like adventure? Do you like travel? And even though I'd never driven a four-wheel drive before, and I didn't know the difference between low range and high range, I went for that job. And because I had equipped myself with these skills, I threw down a copy of Men's Health and Runner's World and all these magazines on the table and said, yeah, I have not driven a 4x4, but I'm sure I can do what you want. I'm your man to go on these adventures. And that's literally how it happened. I backed myself and I said, I can do this. And that was the start of 10 glorious years at SA 4x4 magazine, where every month I would go to a different African country on a different adventure to go and photograph a cover story for them. It was literally that was what I was doing. It was insane. Yeah.
You mentioned during your army days a serious Land Rover crash that lasted, where you were left with some lasting memories in terms of the not just the mechanical but the physical damage that occurred. I mean, in a business, some of one's greatest failures sometimes are some of the best leadership lessons. I mean, what did you take away from that crash? Tell us a little bit what actually happened, transpired.
Well, when Namibia still belonged to South Africa, a small part of it, Walfish Bay, I was stationed there for several months as an officer. And obviously one Friday, Saturday night, it was a big night, and we ended up driving back to the base. And I didn't know that the driver was in no state to drive. And he literally, we were driving to go watch the sunrise in Swakopmund, and we were in a Defender, and he was a bit slow in going past a truck, and we just smashed into the back of a truck. And fortunately for us, it was a Defender, because a regular vehicle would have just got stuck under this truck and we would have been decapitated. My head went through the windscreen. The other guys were all passed out. I thought they were dead. It was quite literally a sobering experience. There was a court martial. The driver fortunately was found not guilty, but luckily we all survived. But it taught me a lot of valuable lessons. And I mean, Africa is still a wild place. And even when I went back there a few months ago on a trip with some of my friends, we were in a similar situation. We were driving late at night, but we hadn't been drinking or anything. We just were trying to get to a destination, and we were pushing at night, and a truck driver fell asleep, and he came across into my lane, and it was dark, and you don't have time to think. You literally just your instincts and your training and what you've learned of years of driving in Africa. You just hard left off the road through the bushes, and fortunately the car behind me followed, and I mean it could have ended really badly. So those challenges will always be in Africa, but it definitely keeps you alert and on your toes, and that anything can happen. But luckily you back yourself that you've got the skill set to deal with those challenges.
Yeah, and of course the situational awareness we can translate directly to business as well. Just knowing what's happening around you, your competitors, your clients, the market segment. Just turning back to your time as Bush editor at SA 4x4 magazine. I mean, obviously as an editor, you've got deadlines, you've got the pressure from the publisher, you've got advertisers screaming at you. How do you manage that balance between like real joyful exploration of a country, an expedition, and balancing that with the commercial pressure of actually producing a magazine, running a business, satisfying the shareholders?
If the advertisers are on board and the money is coming in and the magazine sales are where they need to be, that publisher or that magazine owner is going to give you that golden ticket and say, off you go. And I recently spoke to my old publisher from Caravan, and he said he wished he could rewind the clock to those golden years. There was just that perfect balance of, we were going out there, we were getting these really cool cutting edge adventure stories, but we were also and the manufacturers, the car manufacturers, Land Rover, Toyota, they wanted part of that. We were selling them these really great story ideas, like the one you mentioned earlier when we took the Pajero up to Uganda. My original pitch was actually to Fiat, and it was taking a Panda to Uganda, but we wouldn't have fitted 4 people and all our kit in there. So I'm glad they didn't go for that. But it was coming up with these interesting pictures, these interesting ideas, these stories that the readers wanted to read, and then they would want to go on those adventures themselves. So it was I would call it the golden era of exploration, really. It was a great time to be a journalist and a great time to be adventuring in Africa. So it was getting that balance right. And I think we sort of hit the nail on the head. And there were other magazines that did a similar thing. I think Go and Vach also were doing really well at the time, and Getaway maybe to a lesser extent. But people wanted to kit their own vehicles out and head off. not be guided by someone else. And we could show them what kit worked on the vehicle and where to go have these wonderful adventures.
Tell the listeners a little bit about that Pajero trip that we did. How did it come about? What was the objective going to Tanzania? How was the route decided?
So
Why was that machine never modified for overland travel to begin with?
as an adventurer, you're constantly pushing the boundaries. You want to go further. You want to do more exciting features. You want to go see things you've never seen before. You want to write those stories that hadn't been written before. And so I pitched an idea to several car manufacturers. And because we were based down in Cape Town, we had done all of Southern Africa to death. We had done Angola, Mozambique, Namibia. We've done all those countries several times. And I've been to the Serengeti, but on a quick tour. I wanted to go again, but I wanted to go on my own. I wanted to drive myself there. And I mean, the dream trip would be to go all the way to Cairo. And we probably could have done it then because Sudan, there was no civil war. You could still drive through there at that time. But it was literally a case of pitching an idea to a manufacturer, convincing my editor that it was in the magazine's best interest that I was out of the office for 6 weeks. But there was a lot of research involved. There was coming up with great feature ideas. It wasn't just the big features that we all love, the Serengeti and the gorillas. There were a lot of other stories we did along the way where we stopped in places, whether it be at Vic Falls or parks that other people hadn't heard of, like Ruwa, where we stopped and we saw the amazing lions feeding on a buffalo there. So it was hard work, but it was convincing Neil Harrison, my editor at the time, that it was a good idea for me to do this and that we made money. So that the manufacturer paid a lot of money for us to go and take their vehicle and showcase it. And I came back with over 20 stories from 6 weeks. 6 weeks work, 20 articles. No other journalist delivers that many articles in that short amount of time. So it was hard work, but it was so satisfying. The things that we were seeing, the things that we were doing, it was well worth all the hard work. A lot of the hard work happened when we came back. We got the images while we were there. We made all the notes, but the hard work started when you came back and you had to write those 20 stories. So, yeah.
Yeah, that was proper bucket list stuff. Proper bucket list stuff. So the move to the UK, what prompted that, and how did you land a dream job as editor of Land Rover Monthly UK? I mean, give us a bit of a backstory there.
So I've always loved Land Rovers. When I was at SA 4x4, you drove Jeeps, Toyotas, everything, Mahindras. But I owned a Land Rover when I was in South Africa, and I own one in the UK. So I always had a soft spot for Land Rover. And Land Rovers are from the UK. So when you arrive here, there's no SA 4x4 magazine. There's no comparable magazine. There's only two massive Land Rover magazines. And living in South Africa, these magazines are like God magazines to us. You know, we read them and we are in awe of what these guys produce and see and do. So very fortunate once again, within a month or two of arriving here, I see they're looking for a junior writer. I mean, obviously I'm not a junior writer at the time, but I apply. And I don't just apply. I literally jump. I was staying in Ireland. I jump on a plane. I knock on their door. I say, "Hello, I'm Patrick. I'm your man. I'm the guy you need to hire." And they say, "Sit down, have a cup of coffee." And they love what they hear, but they say things work differently here. You actually have to apply for a job. You have to go through HR. So I do that. I fly over again. I have an interview, and I do a little test. And they on the day they offered me the job, and as a junior writer. But within 2 years, things changed very quickly. Within 2 years, I was editor of the magazine. So same with SA 4x4. Within 2 years, I became the editor. So I was just very fortunate that that position opened up. But it's backing yourself and going all in and saying, I am going to get that. And then began another glorious decade of Land Rover adventures. So it's sort of, I was very lucky. I went from one into another very similar situation. And back then, budgets weren't an issue. Magazines were flying. No one questioned anything. If I wanted to fly to Malaysia to go and join an expedition, my publisher just signed it off, and off I went. Australia, wherever I wanted to go, I went and I did stories there. It was wonderful. Yeah.
So let's talk about the brand Land Rover. I mean, you always get two camps. You get the Toyota camp, you get the Land Rover camp. You know, they say if you want to go on an adventure, you can only do it in a Land Rover, but if you want to get home, you need to a hotel, right? So, jokes aside, it's a cultural institution, Land Rover. I mean, there's no denying that. You were effectively a steward of that legacy. How did you handle the transformation in terms of the introduction of the new Defender, which was very much not geared just at hardcore adventurers or explorers or farmers? I mean, the new Defender is much more like a Range Rover, so it's a much broader base in terms of clientele. But there was a lot of very unhappy Land Rover Defender original owners when this new shape came out 5 years ago.
I think one of the most nerve-wracking things I've ever done as a journalist and was when Old Defender production ended. I was on the production line that day. And it was a massive news event because it was the end of something that had been around since 1948, really. And my phone rang and it was Sky News. Can you please come to the entrance of the factory? We want to interview you. And they did a 3-minute live interview about the end of this the production of this vehicle, and people were emotional. People were upset. People couldn't understand it. Jim Ratcliffe from Ineos wanted to buy the Old Defender production line. Land Rover were having none of it. So it was an emotional time, and it was also, I think, it was an indication of where the company was moving. It was aimed at a different clientele to myself or yourself. It was, and they made it very clear. It's a luxury top end brand, and even though the new vehicle is very capable, you're not going to be able to fix it out in the middle of nowhere when something goes wrong. You need a laptop, a satellite phone. You need to phone a software engineer at Jaguar Land Rover, and they can talk you through possible things that are wrong. And I know people who have been in those scenarios. So yeah, it was an emotional time. But having said that, I mean, this last weekend I was at a Land Rover event in the UK, and those old fans, they're still around. They're still driving their old raised Discovery 2s and old Defenders series vehicles. That following will always be there. These vehicles were so well made, so well put together, and there's so many spares available for them that they're going to be around forever. That's the beauty of an old Land Rover. Yeah.
Reminds you a bit of the Huey, yeah? I mean, they stopped production of that iconic helicopter in 1972 after Vietnam, and yet, you go to the waterfront here in Cape Town, they're still flying around.
Exactly.
New turbines, new gearboxes, new avionics, but
yeah.
that frame is still 1972,
yeah.
60 years old.
Exactly.
You imported your own Defender, old Defender from South Africa. I think you used to call it the Green Mamba.
Yeah.
How important do you think it is for a leader to have a personal story or personal brand running a company? I mean, being an editor of a magazine is the same as being a CEO of a company. But what makes a CEO interesting is if there's more to the personality in terms of a personal brand. How important do you think it is to have something authentic, such as a personal brand, for a CEO in business?
On my first day at SA 4x4, Godfrey Castle said to me, "You need to live the brand." And in order to live the brand, you need to own the right things to be able to do that. So within a year or two of working there, I bought a 2.8 Defender. And then when I first moved to the UK, I tried to buy a few Land Rovers. Well, I did. I owned a few, but everyone knows it rains here and it snows and there's salt on the roads and the vehicles are very rusty. So I decided, you know what? The vehicles are in much better condition in Africa. The exchange rate was favorable. So I bought a very rare Defender in South Africa, and I had it shipped over here. And straight away, the first day it arrived, when I shared an office with Evo magazine and Octane, these are two massive automotive publications in the UK. I popped the hood of my 2.8, and these guys wanted to see that BMW motor. They wanted to take it for a drive. It was something a little bit different. But then, not just that, I kitted it out and it had its own sort of Instagram page, and it got a lot of interest. Within no time, it had 20,000 followers on Instagram, and people could see that I was living the brand. I owned a very different, unique Defender. So I wasn't just, and there have been editors in the past of magazines. They don't drive Land Rovers. Editors of Land Rover magazines, and I can't understand that. And when I chose, or when we hired someone in my place, when I moved on from the magazine, that was very important. The guy we picked is a qualified Land Rover mechanic. I mean, and the people that read that magazine, this man has got a lot of kudos and credibility with the readership. So you can't live any other way but to live the brand.
Talking about magazines, I mean, with absolutely everything going on digital platforms, social media, Instagram, Pinterest, TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn. I mean, do you see a future for the survival of printed media, especially magazines?
Magazines need to reinvent themselves, and those that aren't are dying. They're gone. SA 4x4 gone. Um, and I think Land Rover Monthly is a fine example of this. I often tell people about them. They've still got their wings and they're flying and they're going upwards. And the only reason they're doing that, yeah, people are not buying as many magazines as they used to, but LRM not recently, a couple of years ago, they started their own podcast. Not only that, they've got a successful YouTube channel. They also host what they call spares days. And these spares days, people are lining up at 5 o'clock in the morning in the cold, in the winter, middle of the English winter, at a gate to try and get into this spares day to come and buy Land Rover spares. And there's fields full of thousands of guys selling Land Rover spares. So they've gone and sourced alternative income streams as a magazine. It's not just about the magazine. There's a whole lot of other sub brands with under that umbrella. So that's definitely an example of a magazine that is as that's what I was doing sort of at the end of my time there. Those are the kind of projects that I was involved with, and I'm very proud to say that it's that they're doing even better now. So there will always be a place for print. I mean, I still get printed magazines. I read a lot of books. That'll always be there, but we cannot deny how big YouTube, BBC, how big these other forms of media are. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, two comments. I mean, it's actually about building a community, having those events. You're actually building a community, never mind just the income revenue stream. Of course, if it was Toyota, they wouldn't have to meet for spares to begin with, but we can take that offline. On a more serious note, you traveled with the legendary Kingsley Holgate. In some of our previous discussions, you said if you had to choose some mentors in life, that would probably be one of the guys. I mean, what have you learned from him in terms of the cultures, the experiences, the hardship that he's gone through? What leadership lessons have you taken away from the legendary Kingsley Holgate?
I think the biggest lesson Kingsley has taught me is humanity, how he treats other human beings. He doesn't care whether he's meeting a president or the poorest person in that country. He will offer them the same handshake. He will always ask, "How are you? Tell me about yourself." It's not about him and his expedition. And a lot of people, when they travel through Africa or wherever, it's all about taking their photos or ticking certain boxes or doing. He's not like that at all. And when things do go wrong, especially when you go to the remote places where a border post is closed and you have to camp there at night. But I don't ever see him get flustered. He doesn't. He doesn't throw his toys. It's TIA. This is Africa. Deal with it. Make an alternative plan. Sit it out. Wait. Tomorrow they might change their minds and let you through that border post. So definitely patience and humanity. Treating everyone the same. Knowing everyone's names. Just little things that make a big difference. And he taught me how to get through a border post, that any border post with and there's an art to traveling through Africa, and he's taught me that art. And you will never perfect it because they're always inventing new rules, but there is an art to it, definitely. Yeah.
Fantastic. You mentioned a story where Kingsley said to you that the new Defender that is using now through Africa actually saved his bacon, I think in Sudan, when they were chased by militia. And if it wasn't for the actual speed of the new vehicle, that there would have been some issues. Can you give us some story on that?
Yeah. Obviously, these new Defenders are a lot faster than old Defenders. They're more powerful. Got more electronic aids. So there was a day we were driving through a sort of jungle track, and next thing you know, out of nowhere, almost like in a movie, a Toyota Land Cruiser with a big gun on the back and guys with AK-47s pulls up behind us. And I remember I was testing a new phone at the time, and I was very calm. I started looking at where am I going to dive into the bush, when the bullets start flying, and where am I going to crawl to? You go into a bit of a survival mode, really. I even pushed record. I was going to record whatever was going to go down, but then Ross, I think, was driving at the time, and he just foot flat, and we were able to outsprint these guys and just get away from them. If we were in a 300 TDI Defender, there's no way she would have done that. The Toyota would have come flying past you. So yeah, sometimes when there is a bit of a need for speed or haste, these new Defenders can get you out of trouble. Yeah, definitely.
In business, I found it very important in terms of team selection. The kind of people that you surround yourself, not just in terms of skill set and experience and qualifications, but also how they handle themselves under pressure. When you put a team together for an expedition, what are the characteristics that you look for in terms of team members on a months-long Africa expedition?
Oh man, you quickly know whether you're compatible with someone just by spending a week on the road with them. Their little habits, are things going to irritate you? But what do I look for is people that have sort of similar interests to myself and act in a similar way when the poo hits the fan. And I think on our trip to when we went to Rwanda and Uganda, I think we nailed it because we all brought something different to the party. We had Kristen, she was a trained vet. Baptist, who was a professional hunter and a tracker, and he was like a bushman. I'm obviously the photographer and the man, the wordsmith, and you brought a sort of air of professionalism to our little outfits. We all added something different to the team, but there was never a time where we wanted to kill each other. Obviously, we disagreed on stuff, but it's important to be able to listen to other people's opinions. And then there has to be a leader that ultimately makes the decision that he lives by and dies by. And that person was me on that trip. But I was more than willing to listen to your experiences and Bertus, because I don't know the bush like Bertus does. And so yeah, it's and I've seen it go wrong so many times. My friend, very good mate of mine, did a Trans-Africa, Cape to Cairo, with the Englishman. We spent 3 weeks with them in Iceland, and it was all kind of hunky-dory. Then you go and cross Africa with the same man. No, he wanted to kill him by the end of it. Eventually, he just left him in Naples, in Italy, when the ship docked there with their cars. He said, "Cheers, you stay. I'm going now. I'm going to go to England. I'm done with traveling with you." So I hope he doesn't listen to this. But yeah, it just didn't work out. And they barely speak today. So you have to be so careful that when the poo is going to hit the fan, when things are going to get tough, when things are going to break, when you're going to get held up at a border, that you have people around you that you're comfortable with, that you can play cards with, that you can laugh with. And we did that so many times on our trip through Uganda. And I think it was a time, I think a good example was in Mwanza, when we wanted to sail across Lake Victoria. The guy said, no, the ferry only sails the day after tomorrow. So we ended up watching a Miss Tanzania competition and having a few drinks and a few peri pizzas, and we just had fun and in that time, whereas other people would have been stressed and thrown their toys and why can't the ferry leave now? You got to roll with it, and that's what we did. So yeah, you got to be so careful with the people you pick, definitely.
Kingsley's expeditions have always got a humanitarian angle. How important is that purpose? How does that change the meaning of going on a trip, having a humanitarian objective versus we are just doing a route for the sake of it, or trying to get to a destination? Is that deeper meaning, that deeper purpose, does that speak to you? Does that speak to your soul? What do you take away from that?
I went to Coldplay 2 weeks ago, and I felt so proud that at this concert, I knew that because of my attending this concert, a tree was being planted somewhere. 5 million trees are being planted because that's how many people have seen this latest series of Coldplay concerts. When we go on a Kingsley Holgate expedition, they're handing out glasses. They plant. They rhino art, teaching people about the conservation issues in Africa. But I once did a trip on my own to Gorongosa in northern Mozambique, and my purpose on that trip was to find a rare bird that's only on top of the Gorongosa mountain. I wanted to photograph, I wanted to see this bird. And it was hard because you had to leave your car behind, you had to hike for 2 days up a mountain. But I enjoyed that. I loved sleeping wild on the mountain, cooking on the mountain, and so that purpose of seeing that rare bird, and then also seeing how all the conservation work that was going on the mountain. And I'm fortunate in that my travels as a journalist, there is a purpose. I need to write a story. I need to get great images. I need to come back with that. But whereas most people just travel for themselves, it's a holiday. So I think anything in life that you do should have a higher purpose. Um, Otherwise, you might as well just stay at home. Really, yeah.
Love it. You spoke about the art of traveling in Africa, particularly when it comes to navigating bureaucracy or crossing a border, some difficult guards. This sounds a lot like navigating a complex organization or business challenge. What is the secret to that art that you referred to? When do you follow the rules, and when do you decide to become more creative in a situation?
If you're not going to reach the end goal because of obstacles in your way, then you have to be creative. And I'll give you an example. So I was driving back from Botswana to South Africa once, and someone had to get a flight in our convoy in my car, and it was Zionist Christian Church were having their weekend. So the border post across the Limpopo River into South Africa was backed up for miles. My ex-wife was driving at the time, and I said to her, drive straight to the front of the queue. Don't stand in this queue. I said to her, queues are for people with no internet banking. Just go straight to the front. And she did. And I said to her, you go stand in the queue. Just don't worry. I'll see you later. And I took our passports and I went out of Botswana into South Africa, just walked across the bridge, turned around, and I came back in where you're supposed to come into Botswana. And I found a lady's thing. I said, excuse me, ma'am, we're going to miss our flights. If we don't get to Johannesburg, please, can you stamp? And she did. She quickly stamped us back into South Africa and out of Botswana. And I could see the people in the queue were watching me, and they clocked what was happening. And there was a bit of that they weren't very happy. And I quickly ran around, grabbed my ex-wife, and said, "Come, we're going. We're done." And so we saved ourselves 3 or 4 hours. But I know what I did wasn't right. I jumped a queue, and I'm not proud of it. But I did what I had to get to where I had to. But there are other little things you can do that are not as dramatic. I often, when I used to land in Johannesburg, I would pick up a pile of newspapers at the airport you get for free. And as soon as you drive through a border post, that guy doesn't know what's going on in the news. Just hand it. Good day, sir. I bought you a newspaper. And if I see he's wearing a football shirt, Manchester United, I know what happened to Manchester United last night. They probably lost 3-0. I said, sorry, so sorry, your team lost last night. And then he shakes your hand, and you straight away got a rapport with that guy. And same when I had challenging days at the magazine, where suddenly your publisher says, okay, we're doing a new issue, say a issue of Drive 25. There's a whole new magazine you have to do. There's your deadline. You just have to think creatively. Pull in an old editor, tell him it's your project. Just get in extra resources and think a little bit out of the box. How are we going to put this thing together? I always say impossible is nothing, and where there's a will, there's a way. I know it sounds a bit cheesy, but if you were able to do all those things while you're out on the road, while you're overlanding, to overcome all those obstacles, those hurdles, then surely in the boardroom or at work, when all these things are thrown at you, there must be a way. There must be a way around things. Obviously, you must be careful. The danger, you don't want to become someone that just says yes to everything, but you can definitely find a way to overcome obstacles or hardships or tough tasks. Definitely. Yeah.
I think I like that mind shift change in terms of recalibrating your mind shift. When you see a threat, it's actually a potential challenge with opportunities. Just a different way of actually looking at it. In terms of your new role, in terms of media and content at Frontrunner at Dometic, how important is it to get somebody with authentic skills and experience versus somebody with a large social media following that could really provide more exposure for the brand? I mean, why did they choose you and not some influencer with 50 million followers?
Yeah.
What's the difference?
There's a good chance, like we talk about the art of travel in Africa, there's the art of identifying a good influencer, an authentic influencer. And there's so many out there that I'm not saying they've paid for some of their followers, but some of their content I just can't watch. I cringe. But whereas others, I know, even though they might have fewer followers, I love what they're doing. I love how they're doing it. And I know that people that want to buy our products would relate to the way they are using that content. So, and these days, anyone with a new iPhone or a GoPro sees themselves as an influencer or a content creator. So it's a minefield out there. It really is. But I'm very fortunate. I was there at the start of the whole influencer thing, and it's something that we grew up with. And so it's easier for us to identify or pick the right people. So, but sometimes you gotta take a punt on someone. I mean, we recently had a guy approach us, and I really love his stuff. He drives a Lamborghini. Lamborghini owners are never going to put front runner roof racks on their vehicles, but we said let's give this guy a roof rack, and the content he has done over the last 2 years has been incredible. He's in Uzbekistan now, every day standing on our roof rack, shouting to people and producing them, sleeping in a cornfield and waking up and the shepherds are coming past him. And he's been into Russia. He's done the most incredible stuff for us. But it's just, you wouldn't normally take a punt on someone like that. But there's something about him. But it's proven to be a fruitful decision. So it's not the traditional type of guy you might back, but it's definitely proven to be the correct one. Definitely, yeah.
Just changing some steps here. You in your previous roles, you would look at products from manufacturers and providing partial advice to consumers, to readers of those products, without fear or favor. Now you're working for a specific brand. I mean, what transition did you have to make? I mean, how do you feel if you have to punt a roof rack that is not as good as, for instance, an Alucab product from South Africa or whatever? I mean, do you turn down the review? Do you bite on your tongue?
So
You can't be impartial because your
no,
paycheck is
no,
one
no,
specific product.
exactly. No, of course. So I always said, I call the corporate side the dark side. I said I would never move across to the dark side unless it was a product I believe in. So, and I'm proudly South African. So when I chatted to Stanley Ilman, the founder of Frontrunner, and I, in our job interview, and I told him what I can do, I would never work for a product or a company that I don't believe in. So I think, or I know, we make the best modular roof rack on the planet. Nothing comes close to a Frontrunner product. Yeah, people have copied what we do, and there's been an explosion in the rooftop tent and roof rack market. But I still believe we make the best modular roof rack on the planet, and we offer solutions for so many different vehicles. I'm starting to sound like a salesman, but my role now is very different. I am producing copy for our website. I still write for several magazines, but it's with a front runner hat on or Dometic hat on. So yeah, it's very different, and I've had to change the way I write, definitely, especially when I'm producing copy for consumers or for our dealers. So it's a different tone. It's a totally different voice. And I mean, people said I had a unique voice when I wrote the sort of stuff that I produced. I love traveling and going on adventures and writing about it. But now it's more business-like. Yeah.
You've started doing long distance endurance stand-up paddleboarding. I mean, was it important for you to find a new challenge even harder than the stuff you've done through Africa? Why did you start this new challenge, and does it speak to continuous personal growth? I mean, give us some background there.
The lockdown was a hard time for me personally. I was on my own. I was going through a divorce, so I needed something else. I did a lot of running, a lot of cycling, so I just decided to buy a paddleboard actually. So, and I bought a really good one, and I produced some content, and then the company that makes them, Red Paddleboard, loved it, and so now I'm a brand ambassador for them. And you know me, I don't do things by half measures. So I've done some crazy paddles. I recently, to raise money for the Canal River Trust to look after the rivers and canals in the UK, I ran the London Marathon. It was my 5th London Marathon, but to raise money, I paddled I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning and I left Northampton, where I now live, and I paddled to London. And I was ill at the time. It wasn't a very wise thing to do, but I paddled nonstop for 36 hours from Northampton into London. The paddle wasn't hard. It was all the locks and the canals. You have to pull your board out, and at 3 in the morning, put your board back into the canal, paddle 3 strokes, and there's another bloody lock. So it was tough. There was 100 locks I had to go through in that 70, 80 mile paddle. So, but it teaches you things about yourself. And I've always loved a physical challenge. I mean, just before this podcast, I did a quick run. So I'm a person who likes to push the boundaries. Yeah, definitely. As do you.
So in terms of overlanding, it's normally a team effort, right? I mean, I like to do solo overlanding in most cases, either with yourself or Kim, my wife. But it is still, even if it's a small team, it's still a team. I mean, the paddleboarding is a solo discipline with long hours by yourself. I mean, what goes through your mind, and what is the takeaway from doing solo disciplines such as supping?
Oh, I did a race once across the Kalahari. We ran like 250 Ks. So you had to carry your food for a week. I love the solo challenge because the only person that can let you down is yourself. And and I refuse to let myself down. Obviously, if you're broken and you physically broken something and you can't run anymore or paddle, that's fine. But I'm fortunate that I've never reached that point. During that solo paddle, I did have a 20-minute snooze once. I lay on the towpath next to the canal and then I snoozed for 20 minutes, but it was too cold, and so I just got back on the board, and it was more comfortable paddling than lying in -5 degrees. So, but it builds your resilience and it teaches you a lot about yourself, and you find those little points where you want to break or give up, and when you push past those, the feeling is just, yeah, it can't be beaten. So I will do those sort of things for the rest of my life. Really, I'll constantly push myself. Although, having said that, you talked about going on your own. I'm at a different stage of my life now. I've got a 12-year-old son. I've got a partner who's got a 9-year-old daughter, and I love adventuring with them. We've just been to Scotland in our camper van. It's a whole different dynamic to previously. We've got the dogs as well, but I love it. I love sitting around the fire with them, and I love when we get on our bikes and we go cycling together, and I love seeing their little faces. I mean, those kids have taught me about adventuring as well. They don't care about cold water in Scotland in the middle of the winter. They jump in lakes and rivers. I don't do that. I That's why I paddleboard out on top of the water. But those kids are little adventurers as well. So it's nice. It's nice to pass on that baton of adventure to your son or your partner or your daughter. It's incredible. Yeah.
But to conclude, I mean, my book, Overlanding Through the Boardroom, is all about taking principles of overlanding and adventure and applying it to business. You've lived that full cycle from the wild through to editor of a magazine, right now to the corporate marketing side of things. What is the single lesson you would give our listeners in terms of leadership, having experienced all of that?
That's a very good question. I think by living the brand, you need to be authentic as a person, and people can see that I'm authentic. I've lived it for 20 years in the harshest conditions and the wildest places. I've adventured. So there's when I talk about a product or I talk about a rack or a fridge, I talk about it with a little bit of authority and knowledge. So I think my authenticity cannot be denied or argued about. It's real and it's there. So people know me as the bush editor, a man who has traveled and explored for 20 years. So he's the real deal. So yeah, if you can be the real deal, obviously there are times when we have to not BS our way through something, but we have to be creative to get something done or get through something. But at the end of the day, we've walked the talk. Eh? We've really done it. So yeah.
Patrick Cruywagen, front runner. It's really been a joy to have you on this podcast. Thanks, my friend, and take care over there in the UK.
Brilliant. Thanks, Johan. I really enjoyed that chat. Cheers, buddy.
Cheers, buddy.